Good evening, gentle and not so gentle folks of this fine establishment. I am your bard for the evening. I am certain you heard all about me. Minos the Enchanting. No? That's fine. Well, luckily there's a remedy for all of that. What better way to get to know each other than by having me telling the tale of one of my grand adventures? Allow me to paint the scene. A handful of years ago, I was out far away on the outskirts of civilization, performing one of my many great performances in a little farming village, not much unlike this one. It was during the winter, and the land was covered in white freezing snow, but the tavern was warm and merry, and I was there, in the center of everyone's attention, and as I was getting to the climax of my performance, the door to the tavern was kicked in with a loud bang. Instantly, the warmth of the tavern was drained from the freezing cold blizzard that raged outside and had made its way into the very heart of the room, completely ruining my performance as everyone's attention got shifted towards this dark figure now standing in the doorway. A moment passed in utter silence. Then the figure grabbed the door and slammed it shut before setting in motion towards the innkeeper standing at the bar. Piles of snow got left on the floor for each step the figure took, their identity cloaked in the heavy winter wear they had wrapped themselves in. All eyes in the room followed the figure, except for the drunkard who had passed out in the corner, and as they reached the bar, they revealed themselves as they lowered the frost-covered hood. It was a young woman. Noticing that the entire room was staring at her, she slammed her fist down into the counter and demanded a hot meal and a drink. That seemed to snap the innkeeper out of his trance, and he immediately got to work. The rest of the room, however, was still observing her every move, until one of them asked what she was doing in a place as far and remote as this. And for a moment, it seemed as if she wasn't going to answer, but instead started fiddling with something around her neck. Then, without looking at anyone, she said in a hushed voice that she was out here looking for something ancient. More precisely, an altar to a long-forgotten god. And at this point, she held out the thing she had been fiddling with, an old medallion in what looked like pure bronze. It depicted a crowd of hooded people towering over a skull. Mighty fine craftsmanship, actually. Not your everyday street trinket. At this point, the innkeeper returned with her food and drink, and I swear, for a brief moment, I saw fear in the look of his eyes as he noticed the medallion. But just as quickly it was gone again, and he informed the young lady, in a not-so-friendly manner, that they had no such thing around these parts and that she would be better off moving her sweet little behind back the way she came. At this point, I half expected her to send the rude man flying through the room, 'cause you see, there was a lot more to her than met the eye. Whilst everyone else was busy looking at the medallion in her hand, I had noticed some of the gear this young lady was carrying underneath her thick furs. High-quality sword and dagger, along with pouches and vials full of whatever tools she might need, all strapped neatly to a high-quality set of lightweight armor. You see, this was an adventurer. Not many of those around anymore, eh? But I know one when I see them. So whilst I half expected the man to go flying, she merely ignored his remarks, along with the unflattering comments from the rest of the room. She ate her meal, tossed some coins on the counter, and walked out the door. Able to smell a good story a mile away, I quickly grabbed my things and tossed on my very own and exquisitely warm coat, hurried out the door and managed to catch up with her before she got too far ahead. And as the gentleman I am, I of course introduced myself to her and convinced her to let me tag along on her little quest for this ancient altar, which, after the reaction she had gotten in the tavern, she was quite convinced was close by. I learned that her name was Ness, and that she had traveled this far in order to ask for a boon of this long-forgotten god. And precisely what boon she was seeking, she refrained from sharing, which of course only added to the mystery surrounding this little adventurer. Into the night we went. I had no clue as to where we were going, but my newly found companion had a plan. By lantern light, we made our way out the little village, far enough away that should anyone be observing us, they would see us disappear into the landscape far away. Then we extinguished the light and snuck back towards the village by what little moonlight was allowed through the clouds and the still raging blizzard. We ended up on a little hill overlooking the village, and there we waited for what felt like hours, until the blizzard calmed itself down and only the softest of gentle snow crystals fell upon the world. Lit by the moon, it was a beautiful sight. And at this very moment, lights started to appear just outside the tavern. Dozens of little lantern lights moved across the village and into the field surrounding it. Without a word, Ness started following the group, a woman of few words. But it was clear, even to me, that our path to the altar was about to be lit by the villagers themselves. For about an hour we trekked through the snow in pursuit of the completely silent people. Not a word was spoken, which did strike me as odd. But then again, remote villagers can be quite different, you know, in comparison to the talkative city folk. Anyways, a dark and gloomy cave arose from the white landscape, and into the dark abyss we followed the dim light of the lanterns. At the core of the cavern, the villagers stopped and placed themselves around an altar of pure darkness, and began chanting in a tongue unbeknownst to me, but I can tell you that the very sound of it made my skin crawl. And I confess, I was starting to doubt if this had been the right call, as I could have been sound asleep by now in a warm and comfortable bed. But before I could think any further along those lines, my companion decided the time for action had come. In a single motion, she stood up from behind the rocks we were hiding and shed her furs and heavy winter wear, revealing her true glory. Armed to the teeth with moon-touched swords and knives of the purest silver, she walked out amongst the villagers and held a small vial high over her head, and in a booming voice she declared to all of them that the day of reckoning was at hand. And at that very moment, the vial in her hand lit up with the brightest light I've ever seen. It was as if she was holding the very sun in her hand. The villagers all screamed out, as if they were in searing pain. And then I noticed they were actually set ablaze by the very light hitting their skin. Then the next thing I knew, Ness was thrown to the side as if hit by a gigantic invisible hand, swatting an annoying fly. I thought for sure she would have died from that. I could swear I even saw her body twist in ways a body is not supposed to. But after colliding with the rock-solid cave wall, she just got back up, still holding the bright light in one hand and now unsheathing her blade with the other. Her opponent appeared from the midst of the burning villagers, the innkeeper himself. Unfazed by the burning light, he raised his hand as if to strike Ness again. But before he could make another move, I blinked, and Ness had moved across the cavern and was now thrusting her silvery blade directly at the man. Without a chance to defend himself, she pierced him right through the heart, stopping him just in time. With a thought, he fell to the cavern floor, and I thought for sure it was all over. But at this moment, it was as if the rest of the villagers regained control over themselves, or simply went mad at the loss of their own. They all reached out their hands towards Ness, regardless of the distance between them and her, and seemingly grabbed her from all sides, just like the other guy had been able to strike her with nothing but empty air. They rose her up high in the air, above the altar, about to rip her limb from limb. She was powerless against them. Combined like this, they had won. From my vantage point, I saw the look in her eyes. But it was not fear I saw in them, no. It was the look of triumph. A smile crawled across her face as she let go of the vial of light, letting it fall down towards the ground below her, or more correctly, towards the black altar itself. In an explosion of pure sunlight, the vial shattered on the altar, sending out a shockwave of pure light that upon contact with the villagers obliterated them into nothing but tiny speckles of dust. The altar itself cracked in the middle, and the darkness contained in and around it gained a life of its own, and surged directly upwards as a spring of darkness, completely enveloping the adventurer. The darkness swirled around her, slowing her descent and guiding her down next to the altar. And what happened next, I swear on my old lute, is the very truth of what happened. The darkness entered through her mouth, and I witnessed her eyes turning pitch black. And just like that, she froze. Stood there like that for minutes, not moving, not even breathing. Nothing. I dared to walk over to her and give her a nudge, to see if she was still alive. Her skin was cold as ice, which was either the doing of the darkness or the freezing temperatures. But after a few more minutes had passed, she suddenly broke the silence as she gasped for air. The darkness in her eyes had vanished, and her green eyes stared directly back at me. "It is done," she said with a smile. "I got what I came here for." And then she gave me a pat on the shoulder and went over to pick up her winter wear. As she bent over to pick up her dropped things, I caught a glimpse of the medallion that she had shown in the tavern earlier, though this time it depicted a grinning skull with sharp pointy fangs, and nothing else. I took a final glance at the macabre scene we had left behind us that night. The villagers were but piles of ash on the ground, with their leftover clothing and the smell of burnt flesh still lingering in the air as the only markers of what they once were. The altar looked just like a normal block of rock, with a crack in it, with nothing left to reveal its once sinister state. It was a relief to resurface from the dark abyss of the cavern and out into the moonlit snowscape. We traveled back to civilization together, and I can tell you, after a trip like that, I was both tired and exhausted, but that's nothing a little vacation to the finest bathhouse in the kingdom can't fix. I hope you enjoyed my little introduction here tonight. I'll be over by the bar, so don't be shy. I promise I won't bite.